everybody, Sophia Perola here with the Garden State Film Festival, and joining me today is Margaret and Eden, the directors of the feature documentary Chasing Childhood. How are you guys? Thank you so much for coming to join us today.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, thank you.
We're thankful for the audience. Thank you, Garden State, for watching, tuning into this.
Thank you, audience, everybody watching. Thank you. Before we get started, I'd love for you both to introduce yourselves. Tell us your title in the documentary. Margaret.
Okay, I'm Margaret Munzer Loeb. I co-directed Chasing Childhood with Eden and executive produced it.
And I'm Eden Wurmfeld, and I co-directed the film and produced it.
Thank you. And can one of you tell us a little synopsis for everyone who's watching about your documentary?
Sure. So our film is really a film about the how childhood has changed and about the unintended consequences of overprotecting, overparenting, and overpressuring kids, and how the loss of free play and kind of autonomy in childhood has maybe led to rising anxiety and depression, and some of the people who have sort of set out to make a difference and how communities can change it. And we go to 3 locations in the film: Patchogue, New York City, and Wilton, Connecticut, and sort of see some of the variation in those 3 locations.
Oh, wow, 3 locations. So, I mean, my first question, you both produced this. How did this idea to make a film about, this issue, how did it come about? When did it all start that you guys were like, let's make this documentary?
Yeah, so Margaret and I used to be roommates many years ago, and we're old friends, and we both have children. And we were talking about how we feel like we're raising our children so differently than we grew up. And we both grew up in New York City in the 70s and 80s. And we were just it was literally like a conversation on the couch, just casually, like, wait, I think I was taking the bus to school by myself in 3rd grade. And I was like, I have a photograph of myself in the 1st grade classroom with my key around my neck. I'm almost 100% sure. And then I went home from that conversation with Margaret and checked, and I was like, yep, it's 1st grade. So I had, I knew I was letting myself in and coming home by myself in 1st grade. And I thought, wow, I have kids that one of them was older than 1st grade, and he didn't have nearly the independence that I had at that age. So it started out really deeply personal as parents, and just thinking about how we're raising our kids and what it feels like, and should we be doing something differently than we are, or can we, and why is it like this now, and is it better, and asking all these questions. And what was at first kind of reminiscing and anecdotal led to a lot of research and reading of experts, and then interviewing of experts. And I think our very first expert interview was with Lenore Skenazy in December of 2016. Then we did a flurry of interviews in 2017. And then we really honestly didn't start shooting in earnest, like the story part, until 2018. So it was a long journey, as many of these movies are. I think what was unique about this film compared to some others that I've worked on is that we had more of an idea about the subject that we wanted to make a movie about, but we really didn't know how to make it into a story. And we kind of had to find that as we went. So we front loaded a lot of interviews and did a lot of research. And then we kind of found ourselves in various of these locations, honestly, through Lenore Skenazy, because she, as the founder of the Free Range Kids movement, was working in different communities that were wanting to impact change and look at how their kids were growing up. So we went to those communities and found some stories in those places, which is what you'll see if you've seen the movie.
Wow, yes, absolutely. And it all started in 2016. So did a lot of it Did the story, I mean, I know the subject matter stayed, but did a lot of it change since when you guys were finished with the documentary?
Well, we were fully done pre-COVID. So, I don't know if that's part of the question. So certainly we didn't anticipate when we were editing that we would be in a pandemic. And I think I would say some things have changed for parts of the pandemic for how kids were being raised and the things that were impacting or the greatest stressors for them. What's interesting about this time is we look at a lot of like how kids were overscheduled, or even as one of our our subject says, Genevieve, who's a mom, says we were always aiming for something. I think of that a lot about like what's our film about, the idea that childhood should be aiming for something. And that really was shaken by the pandemic for people. And for some families, their kids took on chores and had to navigate free play. And for other kids, they had, depending on where they lived or their community, certainly in New York City, the kids who had to stay and were barely let outside, they faced other things. 2 years into a pandemic, there's been not necessarily one narrative of what that looks like for childhood. I think what's kind of like, just to comment on that, I think what's a little strange right now, and I don't know if the audience will agree with this, but people seem like, instead of saying, what was it about this time that I can totally rethink my kid's childhood, which is happening, people also feel really anxious and they need to catch up. So I'm a little worried. I don't have the answers, and certainly we haven't, gone around and looked at every community, but we know that there's record high rates of anxiety and depression, and we know kind of nationally, at least, that on average kids are behind, not just academically but socially and emotionally. And from where a pre-pandemic 16-year-old might be. But I don't think we have totally assessed what all the best steps forward are. And we also, just as filmmakers, like, are not here to tell anyone that there's any one way for to kind of navigate things. But anyway, it's just a question I think is interesting. Like, will parents speed up and start scheduling their kids in 50 zillion things and feel like that they have to kind of re-engage in a sort of rat race, or will there be anything from this time that people kind of take away as a plus, instead of like, oh, that pandemic, it was all loss? I hope we do. I hope people can find some good that comes out of a hard time.
It is really interesting to watch this documentary, especially during this time, because if they were already overprotective before the pandemic, I think now people are even more overprotective. You don't know who your kids are interacting with, and it's just really interesting to watch this during this time. One of the stories that you guys have in this documentary is Savannah's story and her mother, and it's a big part of the story. I was wondering how you found families to talk about something so personal and introspective, and especially, how was it gathering those interviews, especially with like Savannah and her mom?
We went to Wilton, Connecticut, as I mentioned earlier, because we knew that they were looking at their town and looking at childhood, and specifically looking at their high school, because they'd had a mental health professional come and do an assessment of stress and anxiety in their school and among their students, and the results they found really confirming what they felt already to be true, which was that their kids weren't thriving as they would want them to. So various people in the town had formed a task force and were looking at these questions. And Margaret and I went without a camera just to meet them. And Genevieve and several other people approached us after this meeting and just said, we are open to being in a documentary. And Genevieve shared a little bit about her story at that time. But it really was a process of trust building with their family, because they shared some extraordinarily painful life moments with us, along with handing over their whole family archive and so on and so forth. So it felt, I mean, they really believed from the beginning, like she said, that they'd had a really hard time. We didn't know so much about their story initially, and that she felt that if by sharing it, she could maybe help others not suffer what her family had, that felt of huge value to her. And so that was the starting point. And I mean, I do think that over time, as they got to know us and trust us more, that some of the interviews and content maybe got a little more emotional, but they really jumped in with us. And as people may know, I don't know if documentary filmmakers are watching or who's watching, but you know, you really have to kind of go through the doors that are open to you. You know, like you have to, I mean, sometimes you fight to get rights to make something, but when something is as delicate as this, it really felt like we needed to find people who were on board in some way from the beginning. So if that helps, I don't know if that answers your question, but
it absolutely does. And another question I have is, how was it for you both co-directing this film? I mean, like, I know that you had it in mind what the subject was going to be, but it was years of the making and you kind of went with the flow. So how did you guys successfully collaborate, and what this documentary was going to look like, and really what the end result was?
Oh God, that's kind of a hard question. I don't even know that I mean, maybe Eden does. I think that we went into this being like, we have an idea as friends. Eden is a longtime producer. I am not. I worked on film production on the, you know, coordinating and not one documentary, but really I came at this more of like a sociologist. I'm a social worker by training. I wanted to like figure something out. And I assumed that Eden, you know, correctly, that Eden had skills that I did not have. So I think that maybe there were pros and cons to that we knew we had some different strengths that we respected. And then we were able to kind of be relatively honest with each other. I mean, you know, I will say one thing, like, we live together and that's not always easy, but there is like an unspoken dance that you learn to do with people. And, you know, that I think we found our way, because not every moment was easy. Not every moment of our film crew was easy. But yeah, that's what I would say is I think we didn't even know where we were going entirely. And we didn't even set out necessarily wanting to direct this. We had thought we were hiring a director and found ourselves as the directors of the film. I don't know.
Well, I think it definitely is a success. Yeah, sorry, Eden.
I would just chime in that I think the best collaborators are people who don't have the same skill set as you have. And sometimes that's actually hard to reconcile, because you're like, wait, am I doing all of this or all of that? But it's like, but like I have, you know, it's like, so I felt like in some ways, Margaret and I were a perfect collaboration, because her social work background and mental health insight was invaluable. And she also has a lot of contacts in this space. And so I don't know, I thought it went reasonably well. I mean, like she said, it was hard. It was really hard at times. And, you know, as many things in life are, you know, I think it's, you know, but it was rewarding ultimately, because I think we succeeded in accomplishing what we set out to do, even though it took longer and it was more expensive and all these things. But we came out the other side, and I hope that the audience was able to get something out of the film.
Yeah. I mean, it's particularly hard when you don't know what your story is entirely. Like, if we were like doing an archival look back on something where we were like, we're going to tell the biography, but we had to, you know, and when you're making a documentary and there's so much footage, you have to kind of, and not saying that it was all amazing, but you have to make a lot of decisions. And, you know, it's kind of like you have to practice a certain amount of non-attachment to the things you thought that were going to be the absolute best things, to see if the pieces of the puzzle all work together. So not just in terms of a collaboration, but I do think there's a lot of like lessons in documentary filmmaking that are just extremely different than, some thinking about something scripted, where you get to decide what story you want to tell from the outset. So I felt like there was a lot of life metaphor in it, which doesn't make it easy, but I did.
No, there absolutely is. And you guys did have a lot of footage because it was not just interviews, but you had like B-rolls of kids playing and you had a lot of footage from people's childhood. So I would love to ask 2 more questions before we wrap up. One, what was the best part of this experience? It was very long, and the worst part of the experience, if you feel comfortable sharing.
The best part of this experience for me was not in the film, was feeling reminded of what it was like to be a kid again at play. And we spent a little bit of time out at in something called the Playborhood out in Los Angeles, and we like got on a zip line ourselves. And I thought that was a nice remembrance of both play and some of the freedom we had as a kid. And every time I could connect with a kid or seeing that, or even seeing it in the footage, I felt some I don't know, it was kind of cathartic. And I would say the hardest part is when it's time to kind of move on from someone you've been working with, that's not moving the project forward. Those moments are always incredibly challenging to figure out how to move on amicably and know that it's the right thing for a project.
Wow, thank you, Margaret. I love that you went ziplining, and watching this documentary reminded me that I was like, all right, I need to do some things that I did as a kid and like play with my niece and nephew, things that I did as a kid. So thank you for that insight. Eden, what would you say?
And well, I concur with everything Margaret said. And I guess I would add that I really valued how this impacted my own parenting and my relationship with my kids, that the making of the film, unfolded over very key years of my kids growing up. And I hope that it impacted my parenting for the better, but that's always hard the proof is in the pudding, right? My kids can assess that in 10 years. I think that the hardest part, and I feel like this happens on almost every film, but are just when you feel like you're not going to make it out, when you're like, what if this never kind of coalesces and comes together, after all this work? Because there's always those dark moments when you're just like, what if it doesn't amount to what we want it to, so I would say those are my.
And there's no one right answer. So I think that's another.
Right, there's multiple things.
To always be right, or you like to know, like the reality was we could have made many films. And I don't know whether we made the best film or not. You have to kind of be like, this is the film we made. And I think that that's a really interesting thing too. And in that I'm sure is true of many documentary films, maybe some it's more obvious, but I think in our case, we made the film we made and we're happy with it, but we know we could have made other films. And I think that's challenging to know in some ways. You have to let things go that'll never come to fruition.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know I'm no expert, but I personally love films that make people think and move and make people reflect. And I think that this film does all of that. And it's really eye-opening. I had no idea there were laws that prohibits kids from like being outside at a certain age. So it really was an eye-opening film. It made me think, and I don't even have kids, but when I do one day, I will remember this documentary. So I just want to say thank you. I think you guys made something great.
I don't know if it's back up, but we have a website, chasingchildhooddoc.com. Did I say that right, Eden?
Yes.
The endless typo person here. We are following some of those laws. Some of them have been changing, and we have content that was not currently in the film that we're looking at sharing with audiences, and we are engaged in a kind of a community screening campaign, and we're just hoping to generate these kinds of conversations in different communities. If people are interested, they should.
I love that. What was the website again for everybody?
chasingchildhooddoc.com.
Okay.
And May 10th, it'll be available on streaming platforms.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. So to wrap up this interview really quick, I would love to ask you guys how you know the Garden State Film Festival. How's it feel having Chasing Childhood screen at the festival this year at the 20th anniversary?
Well, we're just so excited that you accepted our film and that it's happening in person.
Mhm.
Yes?
Yes, it is
This
both
year?
virtually and in
Yeah.
person. So
Right.
lots of
So I
opportunities
think
to
that's
watch.
fantastic. And we just are grateful to our audiences. Thank you. And please be in touch with us. Let
It's
us know what you
also-
thought.
In some ways, we wanted to make a tri-state film, and while we're not in New Jersey, I just would say that it feels like also feels like home. So, you know, that's nice to feel like something's in our backyard too.
I love that. Yeah, New York and Connecticut are like neighbors to Jersey. So it's really awesome. I can't wait for audiences to see Chasing Childhood. Congratulations to you both for making an amazing film and putting all that time and effort. I memean, obviously you should be really proud of yourselves. Thank you to everyone involved. Let me tell everyone watching how they can see Chasing Childhood. It will be virtually with our all virtual pass. So anyone around the world can watch this. But if you want to see it in person, you can check it out Saturday, March 26th in the Jersey Shore Art Center Palia Theater. And this film block 12 to 2 p.m. So definitely check it out. And thank you, Eden and Margaret, for taking the time out to talk to us about the making of the film.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Garden State audience.
Thank you.